Hello and welcome to my podcast, The Science of Ageless Living. I'm Dr. Ethan Hausman Marquise, the podcast where we break down the latest trends, breakthroughs, and controversies in the ever-evolving world of wellness, longevity, and optimal health. I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for another journey into the science and sometimes the hype that shapes how we live, age, and thrive. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz and even more debate in both the medical and wellness communities: peptides versus Big Pharma. Disruption or hype? Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard the word peptides thrown around in everything from anti-aging creams to fitness supplements, and even as an alternative to traditional medication. But what are peptides really? Why are they suddenly everywhere? And, most importantly, do they truly have the potential to disrupt the pharmaceutical giants? Or is this just another shiny promise in the world of wellness marketing? Let's start with the basics. Peptides are short chains of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins in our bodies. Think of them as mini messengers, carrying instructions that regulate everything from how our skin repairs itself to how we build muscle, burn fat, and even how our brains function. Because they're naturally occurring, peptides are often marketed as a gentler, more natural alternative to the synthetic drugs produced by Big Pharma. But here's where things get interesting. Peptides aren't exactly new. In fact, insulin, a life-saving peptide, has been used to treat diabetes for nearly a century. What's new is the explosion of designer peptides, each promising to target a specific aspect of health, from reversing wrinkles and boosting libido, to accelerating recovery and even extending lifespan. The wellness industry is abuzz. Influencers are raving, and clinics are offering peptide injections for everything under the sun. So, are we on the brink of a true medical revolution? Could peptides really threaten the dominance of pharmaceutical giants, offering safer, more targeted therapies for chronic disease, aging, and performance enhancement? Or is this yet another example of slick marketing outpacing real science, a modern-day snake oil dressed up in scientific jargon? Over the next half hour, we'll unpack the science behind peptides, explore the regulatory gray zones, hear from both advocates and skeptics, and try to answer the million-dollar question: are peptides the future of medicine, or just the latest wellness fad? So, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let's explore the fascinating and sometimes controversial world of peptides. Welcome again to the Let's Shift Gears Now and look at the other side of the equation: Big Pharma's role in longevity and wellness. When we talk about Big Pharma, we're referring to those massive pharmaceutical companies, think Pfizer, Merck, Johnson, and others that have shaped modern medicine as we know it. First, let's break down how Big Pharma traditionally tackles aging and chronic disease. Their approach is deeply rooted in rigorous science and the drug approval process. Pharmaceutical companies invest billions of dollars in years, sometimes even decades, into researching, developing, and testing drugs. They target conditions like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases, which are all major contributors to aging and reduced quality of life. The process usually starts in the lab, with scientists identifying a promising molecule or biological pathway. This moves into preclinical testing, think petri dishes and animal studies, before advancing into several phases of clinical trials involving humans. Each phase is designed to carefully evaluate safety, efficacy, dosage, and side effects. Only after passing each phase and gaining regulatory approval can a drug make it to the pharmacy shelf. There are definite strengths to this traditional approach. The most obvious is the rigor of clinical trials. These are double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, often involving thousands of participants across multiple countries. They're specifically designed to weed out placebo effects and ensure that any benefits of a new drug are real and not just hype. This leads to another critical strength: regulatory oversight. Agencies like the FDA in the US, the EMA in Europe, and others worldwide provide layers of protection for patients. They require companies to submit mountains of data before giving the green light. This system isn't perfect, but it's a big reason why the drugs you pick up at your local pharmacy are generally safe and effective when used correctly. Of course, this process is not without its downsides. All that research, testing, and regulation comes at a cost, literally. Developing a new drug can run upwards of $2 billion, and it can take over a decade from discovery to approval. These costs often get passed down to patients in the form of high drug prices, especially for cutting-edge therapies. Access becomes a major issue, particularly in countries without universal healthcare or strong insurance coverage. Another challenge is that Big Pharma's model can be slow to adapt. Because of the high costs and risks, companies tend to focus on treatments for big, established markets, often chronic diseases with large patient populations. This can make them less nimble when it comes to new breakthroughs, like peptides, that might not have a massive market yet, or that require new ways of thinking about disease. Innovation versus status quo. Peptides as a case study. So, are large pharmaceutical companies really slow to adapt to breakthroughs like peptides? The answer is a bit nuanced. On one hand, Big Pharma is constantly on the lookout for the next big thing. They invest heavily in research and regularly acquire smaller biotech companies that are working on innovative therapies, including peptides. In fact, some of the most successful peptide drugs, like insulin or GLP-1 agonists for diabetes and weight loss, originally came out of academic labs or small startups before being scaled up and commercialized by Big Pharma. But on the other hand, the sheer size and bureaucracy of these companies can make it hard to quickly pivot to new discoveries, especially if those discoveries don't fit neatly into existing business models. For example, if a peptide therapy works best as a personalized medicine or needs to be delivered in a novel way, it might not get the attention or investment it needs from a big company used to mass-producing pills. There's also a tendency to stick with what's profitable so-called blockbuster drugs rather than take risks on unproven therapies. This can leave gaps that smaller, more agile biotech firms or even individual practitioners are willing to fill, sometimes bypassing the traditional clinical trial process altogether. The Big Pharma peptide paradox. It's a bit of a paradox. Big Pharma is both a gatekeeper and an innovator. They have the resources to bring safe, effective peptide therapies to the masses, but they're also cautious, sometimes to a fault. Meanwhile, the excitement around peptides is often happening outside of these big companies, in online forums, boutique wellness clinics, and direct-to-consumer startups. And yet, when a peptide proves itself either through overwhelming scientific evidence or undeniable market demand, Big Pharma tends to swoop in, either by acquiring the technology or developing their own versions. An example is the meteoric rise of GLP-1 agonists, like semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, which started as an exciting new class of peptide drugs for diabetes and are now being hailed as game changers for obesity and longevity, with Big Pharma leading the charge. Wrapping up, to sum up, Big Pharma's approach to longevity and wellness is thorough, cautious, and deeply rooted in science. But it isn't always quick to embrace disruptive new therapies like peptides. There's a push and pull between innovation and the status quo, safety and speed, access and cost, essentially mini proteins that act as signaling molecules in the body. They can regulate everything from hormone production and immune response to tissue repair and fat metabolism. Because of this, they're being investigated and increasingly used for health goals like anti-aging, fat loss, muscle growth, improved cognition, and even sexual wellness. Some people see peptides as the next big thing in medicine. Why? Because they're often highly targeted, they can be designed to interact with very specific receptors in the body, potentially leading to fewer side effects compared to some traditional drugs. Peptide therapies also tap into processes the body already uses naturally, which can make them seem safer or more natural in the eyes of both practitioners and patients. But are they truly disruptive? Or are they more of a complement to existing pharmaceutical approaches? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. Peptides offer new mechanisms of action, and in some cases they can do things traditional drugs can't, like regenerating tissue or modulating subtle aspects of immune function. However, for many conditions, they work alongside established treatments, or they fill gaps where traditional drugs have fallen short. Now, despite all the excitement, there are significant barriers to widespread adoption of peptides. Regulatory hurdles. Unlike traditional pharmaceuticals, many peptides are not FDA approved for most uses. They often exist in a gray area classified as research chemicals, compounded medications, or dietary supplements depending on the jurisdiction. This means there's often less oversight on their safety, purity, and labeling. For clinicians, the lack of clear regulatory guidance can be a major obstacle. Lack of large-scale studies. While some peptides like insulin, growth hormone, or GLP-1 agonists have undergone rigorous trials and are part of standard medical care, many others are supported only by small studies, animal research, or anecdotal reports. This makes it hard to know who will benefit most, what the long-term effects are, or how peptides interact with other medications. Large, randomized, placebo-controlled trials are expensive and time-consuming, and, as we discussed earlier, are usually the domain of Big Pharma. Variable quality and sourcing. Another challenge is that peptide quality can be all over the map. Compounding pharmacies and online sources may not always follow strict manufacturing standards, leading to issues with purity, potency, or even contamination. For patients, this means there's a real risk of getting a product that's ineffective at best or unsafe at worst. Let's talk about the hype cycle, a concept from tech and innovation circles that describes how new technologies move from wild excitement through disillusionment and finally to realistic, widespread use. Right now, peptides are somewhere near the peak of inflated expectations. There's a ton of buzz in the wellness community, on social media, and even in mainstream media. Clinics are popping up offering peptide therapies for everything from anti-aging to athletic performance. Influencers and biohackers are sharing dramatic before and after stories. But as with any new therapy, there's a risk that the marketing is running ahead of the science. We've seen this pattern before. Think about the early days of stem cells, CBD, or even hormone replacement therapy. Initial excitement is followed by a period of skepticism as studies fail to replicate early results, side effects emerge, or regulatory agencies crack down on unproven claims. Eventually, the real value shakes out. Some applications stand the test of time, while others quietly fade away. So, are we at the peak? Maybe. But there are signs that real transformation might be happening. Some peptides, like the GLP-1 agonists for obesity and diabetes, have already moved from niche to mainstream, thanks to solid science and proven effectiveness. Others are gaining traction in fields like wound healing, autoimmune conditions, or neurodegenerative diseases. It's possible that peptides will carve out a permanent, important niche in medicine, especially as the evidence base grows. Let's ground this discussion with a few real-world stories examples of how peptides are being used in practice and what the outcomes look like. Case 1. The executive BPC 157 take the story of a 52-year-old executive struggling with chronic tendonitis from years of running. Traditional therapies, NSAIDs, physical therapy, even steroid injections hadn't worked. His physician, open to novel approaches, recommended a course of BPC 157, a peptide thought to aid tissue regeneration. Within several weeks, the executive reported significant pain reduction and improved mobility. Was it the peptide or just the placebo effect? It's hard to say without a controlled trial, but for this patient, the outcome was real. Case 2. The Wellness Clinic, Thymosin Alpha-1. At a cutting-edge wellness clinic in California, practitioners have begun using Thymosin Alpha-1, a peptide that modulates immune function, for patients seeking to improve resilience during cold and flu season. One patient, a teacher with frequent respiratory infections, reported fewer sick days and more robust energy over the winter. The clinic tracks outcomes and collects patient-reported data. But again, there are no large-scale, peer-reviewed studies to confirm these results. Case 3. GLP. 1 agonists go mainstream. On the other end of the spectrum, we have medications like semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, which started as peptide-based drugs for diabetes, but are now at the forefront of the obesity epidemic. Here, we do have large trials and regulatory approval. Patients are not only losing weight, but also seeing improvements in blood pressure, cholesterol, and even longevity markers. This is an example of a peptide therapy that's gone through the full scientific and regulatory process and is now changing the standard of care. So, are peptides disrupting Big Pharma, or is this just another wellness trend? The answer is, it's complicated. Some peptides are truly revolutionary, especially when supported by strong science and robust regulation. Others may never move beyond the height, limited by weak evidence, regulatory uncertainty, or variable quality. What's clear is that we're witnessing a fascinating moment in medicine, a collision of innovation, consumer demand, and evolving scientific understanding. For patients and practitioners, the challenge is to separate genuine breakthroughs from the noise and to push for more research, quality control, and transparency, whether it's coming from Big Pharma or the world of peptides. Let's start with the big picture. The global peptide therapeutics market is booming. In 2024, it was valued at over $117 billion and is projected to more than double by 2030, reaching $260 billion, with a compound annual growth rate of nearly 11%. In the US alone, the market is expected to triple from about $50 billion in 2023 to $160 billion by 2030. This explosive growth is driven by the increasing prevalence of chronic diseases like diabetes, cancer, and obesity, where peptides are proving to be highly effective. So, does this mean peptides are a threat to Big Pharma? Not exactly. In fact, many industry insiders see peptides as a major opportunity. Here's why. Big Pharma's involvement. While smaller biotech firms have pioneered many peptide drugs, Big Pharma has increasingly entered the space, often acquiring late-stage peptide products or partnering with innovators. For example, blockbuster drugs like semaglutide, a GLP-1 analog for diabetes and weight loss, have become massive commercial successes, with Big Pharma companies leading their global distribution. Complement, not replace. Peptides are not so much replacing traditional pharmaceuticals as they are complementing them. Their high specificity, lower toxicity, and ability to target previously undruggable pathways make them attractive additions to Big Pharma's portfolios. Innovation and expansion. The innovative segment of the peptide market accounts for nearly 80% of revenue, driven by R&D investments and new drug development. As patents expire, generic peptide drugs are also emerging, further expanding the market. Expert view. As one peptide researcher with over 25 years in the field put it, peptides are not a threat to Big Pharma, they're a catalyst for innovation. The companies that embrace peptides will lead the next wave of targeted therapies. In summary, peptides are less a disruptive threat and more a transformative opportunity for Big Pharma, driving new therapies and expanding treatment options for patients worldwide. Despite their growing popularity, peptides are surrounded by myths and misconceptions. Let's clear up some of the biggest ones. Peptides versus steroids. Many people confuse peptides with steroids, especially in the context of bodybuilding. In reality, peptides are short chains of amino acids that naturally promote hormone production, while steroids are a completely different class of compounds that often suppress natural hormone production. Not just for bodybuilders. Another myth is that peptides are only for athletes or bodybuilders. In fact, peptides have a wide range of medical uses, from anti-aging and anti-inflammatory therapies to treatments for cancer, metabolic disorders, and rare diseases like Rett syndrome. Safety and side effects. There's a perception that peptides are risky or cause severe side effects. However, when prescribed and administered by qualified healthcare providers, peptides are generally safe and have fewer side effects than many traditional drugs, thanks to their high specificity and low toxicity. Peptides are not new. Some believe peptides are a new, untested fad. In truth, bioactive peptides have been used in medicine for over a century, and nearly 100 peptide drugs have been approved worldwide. Online versus prescription peptides. A dangerous misconception is that peptides bought online are as safe as those prescribed by a doctor. Prescription peptides are regulated and tested for safety and efficacy, while online products may be unregulated, impure, or even dangerous. Expert insight. As one pharmaceutical industry panelist noted, the biggest misunderstanding is that peptides are a shortcut or a miracle cure. Like any therapy, they require proper dosing, monitoring, and medical oversight. With the peptide market growing rapidly, it's more important than ever to be an informed consumer. Here are expert-backed guidelines to help you navigate safely. Check regulatory compliance. Only consider peptides that are manufactured in FDA-registered facilities or licensed pharmacies. Regulatory bodies like the FDA, EMA, and ICH have strict guidelines for peptide quality, stability, and impurity control. Beware of banned or unapproved peptides. The FDA has banned certain peptides due to safety concerns, including immunogenicity and impurities. Always check if the peptide you're considering is approved for your intended use. Avoid black market and research-only products. Peptides sold online as research chemicals or labeled not for human consumption are not regulated for safety or efficacy. These products may contain impurities or incorrect dosages, posing serious health risks. Look for third-party testing. Reputable suppliers will provide certificates of analysis and third-party testing results to verify purity and potency. Consult a qualified healthcare provider. Never self-prescribe or self-administer peptides. Work with a healthcare professional who can assess your needs, monitor your response, and adjust your treatment as necessary. Stay informed. The peptide landscape is evolving quickly. Follow updates from regulatory agencies and trusted medical sources to stay current on new approvals, safety alerts, and best practices. Expert advice. As one peptide physician emphasized, the safest path is always through a licensed provider. If a peptide sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Ask for documentation, ask questions, and never compromise on safety. To sum up, peptides are not a threat to Big Pharma. They're a powerful opportunity driving innovation and expanding treatment options. But with opportunity comes responsibility. Understanding what peptides are and what they aren't can help you make safer, smarter choices. Always consult a qualified provider, and remember, in the world of peptides, informed is empowered. Let's start with the science. Peptides, those short chains of amino acids, are at the forefront of longevity research. Why? Because they play a crucial role in regulating everything from cellular repair to hormone production, and researchers are now harnessing their power to target aging at its roots. Recent years have seen a surge in peptide-based therapeutics, with companies developing advanced peptide drugs for conditions ranging from cancer to metabolic and cardiovascular diseases. These therapies include new medications for obesity and innovative peptides that can disrupt disease-causing protein interactions, something traditional small molecules often can't do. But what about anti-aging specifically? There are now hundreds of peptides being studied for their potential anti-aging benefits. These include peptides that stimulate collagen, act as antioxidants, and even activate telomerase, the enzyme linked to cellular longevity. For example, certain peptides are known for wound healing and skin regenerating properties, while others have shown promise in extending the lifespan of cells by maintaining telomere length. There's also exciting work on peptides that reduce cellular senescence, a key driver of aging, and promote tissue rejuvenation. Growth hormone-releasing peptides are being researched for their ability to boost muscle mass and reduce body fat, both important for healthy aging. While much of this research is still in early clinical stages, the sheer number of peptide drugs in development and already approved signals a rapidly evolving field with real potential to disrupt how we think about aging and health span. So, how might these cutting-edge therapies fit into the broader landscape of healthcare? The answer lies in integration, not replacement. Successful models already exist. For example, peptide-based drugs are now routinely combined with traditional medications to improve the management of chronic diseases, demonstrating how peptides can enhance, rather than supplant, conventional treatments. In cancer care, peptides are being used alongside chemotherapy to target tumors more precisely, reducing collateral damage to healthy cells. Collaboration is key. Integrative approaches involve traditional healthcare providers working hand-in-hand with peptide specialists. This means shared expertise, open communication, and patient-centered care, ensuring that peptide therapies are safely and effectively woven into broader treatment plans. Regulatory frameworks and interprofessional education are also evolving to support these partnerships, aiming to maximize benefits while minimizing risks. Advanced delivery systems are making it easier to combine peptides with standard drugs, improving their effectiveness and safety profiles. As more studies and clinical trials emerge, we're likely to see peptides become a routine part of personalized integrative medicine. With all this excitement, it's easy to get swept up in the hype. But, as with any rapidly growing field, there are risks, especially when it comes to unregulated products and exaggerated claims. Here's what you need to know to protect yourself. Check for scientific evidence. Any health claims about peptides should be backed by robust, peer-reviewed research. Be wary of providers who promise miracle cures without solid data. Consult qualified professionals. Always seek guidance from healthcare providers who are experienced in peptide therapies. They can tailor recommendations to your unique health needs and monitor your progress. Buy from reputable sources. Only purchase peptides from licensed, regulated pharmacies. Avoid suppliers who don't require a prescription or skip thorough medical evaluations. These are major red flags. Watch for red flags. Be cautious of unfamiliar or unlicensed suppliers, products sold without a prescription, exaggerated or too good to be true claims, lack of transparency about ingredients or testing, no ongoing support or follow-up from the provider, products not approved by regulatory bodies. Stay informed about regulations. Familiarize yourself with FDA guidelines and other regulatory standards. This will help you distinguish legitimate therapies from potentially dangerous or counterfeit products. Remember, the promise of ageless living is real, but it's not magic. It's science, and science takes time, evidence, and careful oversight. First, let's clarify the two main categories you'll encounter when shopping for peptides: prescription peptides and research use only peptides. Prescription peptides are those that have been approved by regulatory agencies for specific medical uses. These are prescribed by licensed healthcare professionals and dispensed by regulated pharmacies. They've undergone rigorous clinical trials to prove their safety and efficacy. Research use only peptides are not approved for human consumption. They're legally sold for laboratory research, not for treating or diagnosing disease in humans. However, many online vendors market these peptides to consumers, often with disclaimers like "not for human use" to skirt regulations. This creates a legal gray area, especially when these products are clearly being used off-label by individuals seeking health or performance benefits. MHRA, EMA, and FDA. The official stance. In the UK, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, is responsible for regulating medicines, including peptides. If a peptide is intended for medical use, it must be approved by the MHRA. Peptides not approved for human use can only be sold for research purposes, and marketing them for consumption is illegal. Companies must comply with strict safety, quality, and efficacy standards, and the MHRA provides guidance for advanced therapies, which can include certain peptides. Across the EU, the European Medicines Agency, EMA, oversees the regulation of peptides intended for therapeutic use. Approved medical peptides are legal and available by prescription, but research peptides exist in a regulatory gray area. Each member state may have additional rules, but the EMA's guidelines focus on manufacturing, quality control, and clinical trial requirements for synthetic peptides. Only peptides that have passed these hurdles can be marketed for human use. In the U.S., the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, regulates peptides as drugs or, in some cases, as biologics. Only FDA-approved peptides can be prescribed and sold for human use. Peptides not approved by the FDA are classified as research chemicals and cannot be legally marketed for consumption. The FDA has issued numerous warning letters to companies selling unapproved peptides, especially those marketed for weight loss or bodybuilding, and has cracked down on compounding pharmacies that mix peptides not meeting safety standards. Compounding pharmacies can prepare custom peptide formulations, but this is heavily regulated. In the U.S., for example, many peptides have been reclassified as biologics, making traditional compounding illegal for those substances. Pharmacies must comply with strict standards, and only certain peptides can be compounded for patient-specific prescriptions. The situation is similar in the UK and EU, where compounding is allowed only under tight regulatory oversight. The real danger lies in the black market. The rise of online research chemical vendors has made it easy to buy peptides without a prescription, but these products are often mislabeled, contaminated, or outright counterfeit. Studies have shown that only about 25% of black market peptides actually contain what's on the label, and some have been found to contain dangerous substances like porcine insulin instead of the advertised peptide. The risks include infections, immune reactions, and even life-threatening side effects. Regulators have responded with enforcement actions. The FDA has sent warning letters to dozens of online sellers, and state authorities have investigated counterfeit and contaminated products. The bottom line? If you're not getting your peptides from a licensed healthcare provider and a regulated pharmacy, you're taking a significant legal and health risk. As we come to the end of today's episode of The Science of Ageless Living, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered about peptides, Big Pharma, and the future of longevity science. Peptides have captured the imagination of both the wellness world and mainstream medicine. They're not just a fleeting trend, they're powerful, naturally occurring molecules that act as the body's own messengers, regulating everything from tissue repair to metabolism and immune function. We've seen how some peptides, like insulin and GLP-1 agonists, have already revolutionized care for diabetes and obesity, moving from niche innovation to global standard of care. These success stories show us what's possible when rigorous science, regulatory oversight, and real-world need come together. But as we've discussed, not all peptides are created equal. The explosion of designer peptides marketed for everything from anti-aging to cognitive enhancement has outpaced the science in many cases. While some are backed by promising early research, many others exist in a regulatory gray zone, sold online as research chemicals or compounded without the same oversight as prescription drugs. This lack of regulation brings real risks, variable quality, contamination, and even outright counterfeits. The black market for peptides is not just illegal, it's dangerous, with studies showing that only a fraction of these products actually contain what's on the label. Big Pharma, for its part, is not being disrupted so much as transformed. Rather than seeing peptides as a threat, pharmaceutical giants are embracing them, acquiring, partnering, and investing in peptide-based therapies that complement and expand their portfolios. The future isn't about peptides replacing traditional drugs, but about integration, using the best of both worlds to deliver safer, more targeted, and more effective treatments. So, what does this mean for you? First, be an informed consumer. Demand evidence, not just anecdotes. Only use peptides prescribed by qualified healthcare professionals and sourced from regulated pharmacies. Be wary of miracle claims, unlicensed suppliers, and products that seem too good to be true. Remember, the promise of ageless living is real, but it's grounded in science, not hype. Second, recognize that the most exciting advances in longevity and wellness will come from collaboration between researchers, clinicians, regulators, and yes, even the pharmaceutical industry. As more peptides move from the lab to the clinic, their safe and effective integration into personalized medicine will depend on transparency, rigorous research, and ongoing education. Finally, stay curious and cautious. The world of peptides is evolving rapidly, and while the future is bright, it's also complex. You're